Hi, everyone. We'll be waiting 2 to 3 minutes before starting the webinar to accommodate for the rest of the attendees who are in the middle of connecting. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for being part of our community. My name is Valan Kolika, and I'll be your host for today. Few reminders before starting the webinar. If you have issues viewing the stream at any time during the presentation and are using the web browser version of Teams, please refresh your browser. This is very common, see that on frequently. If you are using the desktop app of Teams, please exit and rejoin. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be shared publicly. We will post the recordings on our community at aka.ms/security-webinars. During this time, please feel free to ask questions at any time by typing them in the live event Q&A window by clicking on the Ask Question button. Be aware that any questions you post will be publicly visible. However, if you prefer, you can post your question anonymously by checking the box right below where you enter it. We often get many questions on these webinars, and we will do our best to respond to all of them in real time. However, in the event if the answer was not provided, or if you may have additional questions post this event, please don't hesitate to raise them on Microsoft Defender ATP forum, which has been already posted on the Q&A channel. At aka.ms/MDATPTC. If you're listening to this after the fact as a recording, that's also a great place to ask a question. Now, we love to hear your feedback on how we can improve these webinars, and you can do so at aka.ms/security-webinar-feedback. And while you're there, please join our community by visiting aka.ms/security-community. That's the best way to ensure you don't miss any future webinars or major announcements. On our community, you can speak directly to our engineering teams that create our security products. You'll be able to influence our product designs and get early access to changes by doing things like participating in private previews, and you can sign up for that at aka.ms/security-private-preview. And while you're there, you can request features, give feedback, review our product roadmaps, attend in-person events, well, that's coming up soon, or join webinars like this. We believe that the best way to improve our products is by removing any barriers between you and the people that create them. So we hope you'll join us. In today's session, Chris and Dominique will take us through the deploying part of Microsoft Defender ATP capabilities using a phased roadmap. Chris Jackson, along with Dominique Hillman, are both principal program managers with our Microsoft Defender ATP team. And without further ado, I will turn it over to them. Chris, Dominique, the floor is yours.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And super excited to be here today and walk through this roadmap. Kind of from a roles perspective, I spent most of my time working on sort of the protect tier when you think protect, detect, and respond. And Dominique brings a ton of expertise around, detection and response and her experience, working with various SOCs. So we're going to try and bring both of those in and build a really well-rounded deployment roadmap based upon what we've seen in actual customers. And the framework we're going to use is one that kind of divides it into 30, 90, and beyond. What should you be looking to do in the first 30 days? What about the next 90 days? And then beyond that, what's the roadmap? And what are we seeing customers doing? So we're kind of going to go step by step and take a look. And we kind of start off with the first stop, which is, hey, as soon as you get started with MDATP, let's work on operationalizing EDR. How do I get everything activated so that I can start going there? So we'll kind of start off with just some of the basics of getting things started. And if I go over into and I'm going to use Zoom it here as soon as I get to the right spot. So apologies for the 4K monitor, but we'll zoom in as we navigate our way around. We're going to go into the settings, and inside of the settings, there's an onboarding section. And in this onboarding section, I'm able to kind of pick from a bunch of different options for how I can easily onboard. And this really is the key, is getting as many devices as possible onboarded. By way of expectation setting, we have seen customers who've gone through 100,000 or more seats in a single week from a deployment perspective. It's usually fairly easy. Now, these different deployment methods are going to lead to a script, but we're not actually doing an install. One of the things we talk about frequently is, hey, it's built in, not bolt on. We just need to configure it to make sure that those endpoints are pointed to your tenant. And one thing I wanted to point out while we're here is that one of the attributes that we have in onboarding as well as in offboarding is going to be a signature. That's going to be specific to ensuring that, hey, this is going to validate that you belong to this tenant, or offboarding that you're approved to do that. Super important to remember that around offboarding, particularly if you're going for a demo, because you will not be able to offboard without a signed offboarding script for that particular tenant. Why not? Because otherwise, the adversaries would potentially go ahead and offboard you if you didn't require some kind of proof that you're authorized that being offboarded. So that's sort of the rationale behind that, is we want to make it as tamper resistant as possible. So there's that signature block that's built in. So super easy to do if you're deploying it through any method. Even easier if you're going through Microsoft Endpoint Manager. If we kind of quickly take a look here, go into the endpoint security node, which has come in recent months. There's an MDATP section down here. And from here, I can say, hey, I want to launch over into one particular thing or get it set up. This one happens to be already set up, but I can go in and configure, the profiles to get things started. And I can do that right here to create a device configuration to do that, onboard to ATP. And from here, I can go through and configure, hey, how do I want to configure the client and who do I want to assign it to, and determine how I'm going to actually get this deployed. So, without having to download a package and then re-upload it, there's a direct connection between the two that is enabled. In fact, if we go in and take a look, at the advanced features section and kind of scroll down, here's where we configure that connection to make that a super, super seamless experience for getting onboarded. So step one is obviously getting connected, and then step two is starting to use it. And for that, I'm going to turn the floor over to my friend Dominique to walk us through, the sort of investigation experience. Dominique?
Alrighty, so we are going to switch over to my screen here. And so after you start onboarding, of course, the next thing that happens is you start to get alerts and incidents. So what I have here is I am started at this is actually the security.microsoft.com dashboard, and I can see in my environment, I've got a few active incidents going on, users at risk. Gives me a nice overview of my situation. And in the Microsoft ecosystem, we actually focus on incidents a lot more than we focus on alerts. So the idea here is that some of the very first things that I used to do in a SOC when we got an alert was, do I have any other machines with this same type of malware? Are there any other alerts on this malware? So I would have to do that correlation myself and use Notepad or OneNote or whatever to take notes and make sure I was able to consolidate everything into one group of things. What Microsoft does is it automatically does those types of groupings. So when an alert hits, Microsoft is going to go through and say, well, I see I've got other alerts, so that goes into my incident, and I see I've got that same malware on a few other things. So this is our incidents queue. One of the new features that we have that just came out, so you can see some of my older incidents, I just have numbers on them. One of the new features that we have out is where Microsoft is going to give you a fairly descriptive name that explains what's going on in the incident. So the one we're going to look at right here, it's a multi-stage incident, defense evasion, credential access on multiple endpoints. The other thing I'm going to point out that we'll get into in a second is active alerts. So I have 7 active alerts out of 13. I'm going to go ahead and click on my incident right here, and I get this nice summary page that starts to tell me the story of what's going on, summarizes the machines that have been impacted in this situation, the number of alerts. If in my situation I didn't have anything related to email, but if it had come in over email, I would have that information. So I can start looking at this incident. So one of the first things I'm going to do, I'm going to assign it to me. So it's my incident, I need to start investigating it. Of course, you can add comments here of this is what happened, and this will keep track of what's going on as you investigate your incident. The next thing I start to look at is I'm going to go ahead and click over here on my alerts. That will load up momentarily. So I can see I've got a number of alerts here that were already resolved. So these are alerts that I don't have to worry about because there were no threats found, and the automation, which we'll talk about in a little bit, which is the auto IR, automation already went through and investigated these particular alerts for me, and I don't have to worry about them. But what I do need to look at and say, I'm going to go ahead and...
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I think your mic is rubbing against your shirt or something. If you can just check on that.
We'll try and hold it up. Is that a little better?
Okay, yes, thank you. And if you have the option to zoom into this, that would be great.
All right.
Thank you so much.
So now I'm going to try and hold the mic and zoom in. I can make this work.
Thank you.
Maybe. Maybe not, but we'll make it work. But my zooming in is not working. So what I clicked on here is I clicked on new in this case, and I'm going to apply it. And now I've lost my mouse because I was trying to zoom in too much. It's going to get there. All right, so we're going to make this go away. Let me flip over to the other dashboard and see if this one will come up a little bit better for me. First world problems. Going to check one of my other windows to see if I can get it to come up a little bit faster, since this one does not seem to want to go back in line for me. Woo.
That's some serious
pretty.
zoom right there.
I zoomed in. You guys wanted zoom, I got zoom. We'll try and pull it back down, but it's pretty slow pulling things back down. No, Antonio, you cannot have control. All right. So what I was saying is I wanted to go ahead and select my new alerts only. And I'm going to clear my filters. Select my alls, select my news, go ahead and apply. Wait for my alerts to load. So what I am left here is I'm left with just the alerts that were not able to be managed with automation. So what I could do is I can go ahead and check into these alerts and see what's going on. So what I would do when I was doing an investigation is I would go through and check all these to see what happened. So I'm going to click on the alert, head myself over into my alert page. And one of the things that I noticed right off the bat is on my alert page, even while my alert story is loading, is I can see my detection status here is prevented. So what I'm able to look at is, yes, I can look at the whole story of what happened, but I can see that while the tool was detected, it was also prevented. So I'm going to go ahead and say that this alert is resolved, and it was a true alert. So this truly did happen, but it was part of security testing because this was my testing. So that's how you start investigating your incidents, and you go through and manage all of these alerts that are left over to figure out what was going on with them. So this is the process of investigating your alerts. So I'm going to hand it back over to Chris.
Excellent. Yes, and there's a couple comments in the chat as we went along, which is, hey, help me map this back to what you mean from a plan. And so we're on step one here, but what we wanted to show in that step is, really, if you've gone all in on Microsoft Defender ATP, the first step most people take is to get EDR up and operational. It's typically, one of the easier things to do. I often refer to as getting dial tone, right? So now we have the ability to talk to the different devices and start to see some value straight away. And then, a question actually already came up, which is our second point, which is, all right, great. Now that you've got signal coming in, so deploying EDR, fairly straightforward. It's a script through whatever your management tools are, and then you can start investigating, and that just becomes an ongoing learning process, and we'll look at that. The second really important point is now we need to figure out how to manage it. And manage it both from a what do we do in the portal perspective and what do we do from configuring the endpoints perspective. How do we define roles and how, to make sure that we kind of follow that principle of least privilege in the service itself. And then how do we configure the endpoint? Dominique, do you have any of your experiences from, getting roles configured in the portal? Like what's kind of a typical process for, configuring, access to the portal and to the security service itself?
So generally what we go down with is, of course, you're going to have the global admin who accesses everything. But the way I've seen it done is it's divided up by the level of your SOC analyst. So I always worked with, L1 are your junior analysts. So they have the ability to do normal investigations. Sometimes we would limit what devices they could do investigations on. And then as you move up in the chain, L2 would possibly have the capability to do, say, device isolation, which is one of our response capabilities we haven't gone into yet. And then the higher up in the chain you go, you can do things like isolate the devices, do live response on the devices as you start to continue up the chain of we have confidence that you know what you're doing. So that's generally how we see distributing access. In the Microsoft, we also have a few other features that we're going to get into in a few minutes. It says we're frozen. I don't know if that means everybody is frozen or just me. So we're going to hope it keeps going.
You're good. All good.
I hear you fine. Yeah,
okay.
All good.
Perfect. So threat and vulnerability management, we're going to touch on that here in a couple minutes. So some of that's going to be maybe your vulnerability management team doesn't necessarily need to know all about the security incidents, but you want to give them access to the really cool information that we have in TVM. So we also do dividing up based on roles in the company, and it's not just the security operations team that is going to be using access. The last thing that we do in here is, depending on a company and the sensitivity, we also set up machine groups to where certain users, or maybe servers, for example, the lower level analysts shouldn't be able to see or touch those at all. So we can use machine groups as well to limit what devices our analysts can see.
Yeah, and then so a couple of extra points. So first of all, we also need to think about how are we going to have control of the endpoint. And one of the things you've probably even noticed so far, and I'll kind of click back over here, slide my window back in front, is that we're building out an endpoint security plane inside of Microsoft Endpoint Manager. So no longer is there sort of multiple different paths to configure devices and potentially competing configurations, but that it comes through a central portal. And one of the things that we're also busy working on, in fact, the 2002 release of Configuration Manager implements that, is by Cloud Connect Configuration Manager. I end up with a single UI configuration surface that can reach out and touch my endpoints. There's a whole session at last year's Ignite that goes through exactly what that strategy is, which is single configuration surface and then deployed however you happen to be managing your endpoints. Which is sort of the overall strategy. But for those who aren't using Microsoft Endpoint Manager, we also have policies available for all of these, kind of depending on how you're configuring it. But the strategy is very much towards, let's make it a consistent experience rather than every tool has a different experience. Final point I'll make, just as as security people, we should practice what we preach. This is connecting to your security plane. The more privilege you have, the more you should be protecting your privilege. So securing privileged access principles, super important here. So then on to the next step of, all right, great. We've got our EDR, which is sort of the fun feature. I can start seeing things straight away, and now I'm managing it. We kind of then get into, how do we start enabling and configuring our next gen protection in order to start to do that. And that's kind of a fancy name for what historically we called AV, although these days AV is a lot more than AV. So kind of talk about configuration. Let's actually slide our endpoint manager back in place here, and we can take a look at the fact that we now have a whole new antivirus node through which I can create a policy. And I can create that policy both for Mac OS and Windows 10. So, regardless of which platform I'm on, we now have, AV for Mac. So I could go through and create a Mac profile for AV. And then from here, I can give it a Mac OS AV, give it a name, and then I can see all of the different configuration options that I have. There are more options available in the Windows client. It's been around a bit longer. But I can kind of see what's surfacing to the top here and push this configuration directly through a unified experience. So I can kind of do that transition over to what I'm doing. And if I go back and take a look, I can actually see, all right, here's the settings that I have. I can look at the properties and view the settings that I can configure for Windows as well. So this is my Windows 10 policy that's been applied. And I can look at all the different configuration options that are here, manage that, assign it to different groups so I can get that configuration pushed out that way. So part of it is configuring it. Dominique, I think you can also take a look at how we can do some custom indicators to influence those detections. So let me kick it over to you.
Exactly. So we're going to go back to my security operations dashboard. So down in the settings, Chris popped into this a little bit earlier. I don't think this is shared. This doesn't look like it's shared. I'm going to try that again.
Right.
Not shared.
No, you're not shared.
There we go. Yes. So back over to the little settings icon, and we have the section called indicators. So this is where you're going to put in your allows and block lists when you have them. In my case, I've got a couple of hashes that I put in here. We can do alerts and blocks, and allows. So depending on the situation, there may be a situation where something like TeamViewer, which we generally do make alerts on because it's used maliciously, maybe that's the approved application in your environment. So you want to go ahead and put allows in for certain cases like that, or there's certain teams that are allowed to use what appears to be malware because it's your pen test team. As we can see, you can do IP addresses. I don't have any. URLs and domains. In my situation, I actually have my environment tied in with our Microsoft Cloud App Security. So I went ahead and said Facebook, Box, and Fastly are unsanctioned applications, which automatically puts alert and block rules within Defender ATP. So my users aren't able to do anything with Box or Facebook. It's really kind of sad because I like Facebook. Certificates is another way that we can go ahead and do allows and blocks. Fairly straightforward. If it's something, especially on an allow, you don't want to have to put in a hash for every time a new version of your tool comes out that you're going to allow. So I highly recommend using certificates in those cases. I'm going to show a little bit about adding an alert here. So I've got a hash that I'm going to go ahead and add. And this happens to be Notepad. But what I want to show is we have this idea of showing statistics here. So as this runs, I can actually get information from my endpoint devices of who's actually using this before I go ahead and create my blocks that I'm going to put in place. So I can see only one user did this. It's Notepad. I ran it about 25 minutes ago. So it gives me a really good feel of how many devices I'm going to affect in these situations. Actions, alerts and blocks, and allows on here. And then the last thing we want to talk about is selecting the devices that you want to apply to. So this is where we get into the idea that you can create specific rules for specific parts of your environment. So GenPop actually happens to be all of my devices. And I'm going to say, yes, you can run Notepad because it's not a bad thing. So that is our alert. Those are our indicators for our allows and block lists. We're going to get into a little bit of custom detections, but I'm going to make you wait until we get into our hunting situation, where I'm going to show you how we do custom detections. And I think I'll let Chris pop back up to our slide deck.
Yep.
But then we're going to pop back over to me.
Detouring quickly over to TVM is to kind of take a look at kind of the next step in the journey, which is, all right, great. EDR set up, I'm managing it. I've got, my AV set up. I'm starting to customize that. I'm getting that cloud delivered protection. How do I then take the next step of getting at, the sort of defensive and protective attributes of TVM? So I'll click back over to you, Dominique, to kind of walk us through the TVM experience.
All right, so TVM, we're going to go over into our little castle icon over here. This happens to be one of my favorite icons. And we're going to see that my environment is pretty clean. It's really nice when you only have 4 devices. It's very easy to keep it clean. So my exposure scores are really low, but I do have security recommendations that I should be putting into place. One of the things that Microsoft does really well is helping you understand which of those vulnerabilities, because we know there's thousands of vulnerabilities in the world, which ones are actually going to hurt me the most. So we can see here, I have Notepad++ installed, and this little red bug that I have, it tells me a denial of service exploit is publicly available. So it makes it a little bit more important than my VLC media player, which is also vulnerable and it should be patched, but I don't have any threats or breaches known to be associated with this. Internet Explorer is also one of those. It's a local privilege exploit. So those are the ones that I should be patching a little bit more quickly. I can go ahead and click into my Notepad and see that, yes, I have it on 3 devices. There are 3 vulnerabilities, but on my version distribution, I can check and say, only one out here has this old version that I need to go ahead and patch. So I've got my security recommendation. It tells me I should update it. Within Defender ATP, I can go ahead and create a remediation action. I can export the devices that I need to see. So maybe I just need to see the exposed devices. Flutter Puppy does terrible things. Never patches his machine. But I can go ahead and click on my remediation options. I can open a ticket. In my case, I'm not joined to ServiceNow, but you can also join MDATP to ServiceNow. And that's going to send a ticket over, in my case, to Intune. So my security operations team knows that I need to patch this, and then I can track the patching and the progress on my remediation all within Defender ATP. So where we're getting all this information, we're sitting on the devices. We can see what's installed on the devices, and that's where we start collecting the information to say, here's what your threat and vulnerability landscape looks like based on what we see within your environment. Yes. And that's what I've got on TVM. One thing I do want to point out is Chris and I are both going fairly high level within all of these different security settings and features within MDATP. So in feedback, if there's something that you want us to do a deeper dive into, just let us know and we can do more webcasts and deep dive into other situations that you want us to tell you more about.
Yep, and I've been watching the comments as well. And so one of the resources I wanted to point out, because there are some questions on, hey, getting it onboarding and connected correctly, that's a challenge. And it turns out we actually have a sort of a deeper dive just on that portion. In this one, we're really trying to look at, hey, what's like the first year of your experience going to be like, and touching on all of the things. But if you're really focused on how do we get started, this is the great step-by-step guide. And, love to hear your feedback on, hey, please walk us through all of the details of how to do this before. How do we prepare? How do we set up? How do we onboard? This guidance is up here. But please let us know if there's anything you're struggling with, particularly as we kind of try to overview, sort of all of the different things that happen. So I wanted to point out that resource as well. And then finally, and Dominique alluded to this, that she has the ability to assign security tasks. And so from a, security, management perspective, this is where that would show up. I would actually get a task where the security team through MDATP can assign something to me. Dominique was kind and didn't actually say you have to go do this now, but this is where this would show up, so I can go through and manage that, see the impacted device when it was created. It's sort of managed, and have a fairly simple workflow on the security management side. So kind of the next step is getting TVM operationalized, and then finally, really digging into auto remediation. So again, I'll turn it back to Dominique to kind of show us what that experience is as we kind of finish off the final step in our first 30 days.
Right. So auto remediation, I alluded to this one and said that I have auto remediation turned on in my environment. So this is where I can start doing my auto remediation. And like I said, I only actually have one machine group in my device, and I have it to fully automate everything. Any ungrouped devices, I have semi in there to where I can say require approval for all of my folders. So you may be asking, why do I have semi, which is approval for all devices? If I say no automated response, there will be no data collection that we're going to see. If I don't want to trust Microsoft and all of their recommendations, I can say, yes, you tell me what you think you should do, and then I can just approve everything. And we give a couple of different areas of doing what things need to be approved. In my case, I do go ahead and remediate threats automatically for my devices. So we're going to go ahead and from my incidents, we're going to check out one of these that had a good auto remediation. So this is a multi-stage incident involving execution and discovery. So we didn't look at this earlier, but I'm going to go ahead and look at this investigation, and I can see that the status was remediated. I know it was detected from AV, and I know this is my Flutter Puppy entity. So this piece right here, this is what auto IR is doing for you. So an alert that is auto IR-able, those are hard words to say. That alert comes in, and what Defender ATP is going to do is it's going to go collect a bunch of information off of the affected endpoints. So in this case, the entities analyzed, you can see I have about 4,000 entities, which involves processes, IP addresses, files, things like that. And then going through, it decided that I did have the other two correlated events. So I had the alert that started the auto IR, And then Defender ATP decided that these were all associated with it. When I look in my evidence, I can actually see what happened. So a couple of these, it tells me it's not found anymore. So I have no threats found. This is doing some weird things. But my verdict is I can't find it. The executable is not there anymore. If I wanted to see what happened, I can go ahead and click on Go Hunt. And this is going to actually run an advanced hunting query for me that will tell me what happened with this particular file. So we're going to pop back to that one in just 1 second. Oh, it loaded quicker than I thought. So I can see here that I have this explorer.exe. The problem is we're masquerading as a known Windows file. I can see the file was created, but then I see 1 second later the file was deleted. So that explains why my automated investigation couldn't find it anymore. The other thing that's interesting about this particular situation is I have this other file that's this F00, nice complicated file that it found at the same time. And this doesn't look super related because my path is different from what was Explorer. So I want to look and see a little bit more detail about this file. So I can go ahead and click open my file page. VirusTotal doesn't like it. It's only been on one device in my organization and 9 devices worldwide. So that seems a little bit sketchy right there. But what I can see is I go over here, and this is where I installed my vulnerable version of Notepad++. It was bundled with a potentially unwanted application that tried to install another antivirus for me. So part of my investigation actually found something that, while not completely unrelated, I didn't have an alert on yet, but it found it and went ahead and cleaned this for me. So that is the power of the automated investigation situation. The other thing to point out, if I disagree with it, I can undo the actions. So if I decide that that shouldn't have been remediated, I can go into my Action Center, which is over here in my Action Center. I'm going to click on my history. And I'm going to say, you quarantined my file, but I don't agree with you. So I want you to not quarantine my file anymore. So my recommendation is make sure you have auto IR turned on with approval in the first place. And then as you go through and watch and see what Microsoft does and gain confidence, then you can start increasing the level of automation, which decreases the amount of so-called busy work that the SOC analysts have to do.
And that undo button is just phenomenal. And we hear that all the time, right? Every single time, you know, if you want me to, you know, make a transition to something, let me undo it so that way I can build that trust gradually. So that's a really good way, because, you know, when it originally came out, it was just trust us or don't trust us, and having watched it, and now you can trust us more quickly because you can always undo anything you don't trust. So that kind of gets us through the first 30 days. So let's kind of get into, hey, what do we see customers doing in the next 90 days? And one of the first things, and often that fact that we see people doing this before, is starting to enable the attack surface reduction controls. And a favorite subject of mine, because this is all about you know, protecting the device and constraining that attack surface. So let's actually start off on the detection side, and what data can we use to help us to enable that? So Dominique, I'll turn it back to you, and then we'll come back to me to kind of go through and configure it. But how can we start to see what's the potential impact of enabling the various controls to reduce the attack surface on the devices in the organization?
Exactly. So attack surface reduction, you may hear us talk about ASR quite often. And so the idea here is tools do things that tools probably shouldn't do. Word really doesn't have a good reason to open a command window and download and execute files. It can happen, but generally there's not a great reason to do that. So those are our attack surface reduction rules. So we have the attack surface reduction rule postures. So this is basically, it's an automated search from security recommendations. And I can see I've got multiple attack surface reduction recommendations, and I can see exposed devices. Most of my devices are exposed. But what's really neat about this is if I go here and I click it, based on telemetry for the past 45 days. So we're watching to see how this is going to impact your devices. And we could say none of your devices are going to have any expected productivity impact. So we start doing those analysis pieces for you even before you know to look there. And you can start looking and saying, can I actually turn this on? Is it going to hurt my organization? And is it going to hurt specific users in my organization? So I can actually open the remediation just for safe devices. So if I have a situation where 90% of my devices are going to have no impact, easily open a remediation and turn it on for them. And then the other 10%, I can start doing a few more investigation options to see what does this actually mean when I say there's going to be some impact. So where I would go to see some of that impact is attack surface management. So this brings me into the compliance side of the house. And I can start seeing what my detections look like. And I can see if I wanted to turn on LSAS, block credential stealing from LSAS, I can start to see what the source applications are that are doing these. So I can investigate what things are actually triggering the block, or in some cases, if you have it configured as audit, I can start looking and seeing to investigate what is going to be impacted if I turn these types of things on.
Yeah, and the audit control gives you better. We've gotten to the point now where we can start to showcase, hey, what might happen, but the quality of the data goes up. So if we go back over to our security management console here in Microsoft Endpoint Manager, here's where I can go through and configure those controls. So if I go in and create a new policy, I'm going to make this for Windows 10. And I've got a bunch of different sort of attack surface reduction areas, whether it be device control, app and browser isolation, which is, Defender Application Guard is the primary feature there, exploit protection, which is the successor to Emmet, web protection, app control, and ASR rules. Most people really start with the ASR rules because it's a lot of bang for the buck. So let me go ahead and create some rules and then navigate back over here. So ASR controls and next. And here's where I can see all the different settings. And we don't tend to turn all of these on by default because, as Dominique said, most of your apps probably aren't doing this. But let's say, for example, if we kind of zoom in, let me get a different zoom type here. If we look at, hey, don't create executable content. And there are plenty of Office applications that I've seen where someone writes a macro that generates something in real time. And that's going to break potentially that line of business application, right? Or creating a child process is even more common, where let's say you automate something where Microsoft Word's going to kick open Microsoft PowerPoint, right? So that create process is going to be blocked by this and potentially blocking a business process. So certainly understanding like, hey, is my current environment and software ecosystem going to be compatible? And then once they are, I have the ability to go in and click all of these on, right? I can put it in audit mode, which will improve the quality of data that it's gathering, or I can just enable, which is going to specifically put it into block mode. So that it's going to actually stop that from happening and report out. So it's super easy to configure and a great way to start continuing to reduce the attack surface in the environment and make it harder to attack as part of this overall ecosystem. So once I've gotten my attack surface reduced, and that's going to be a journey we continue down, then we look at, great, now we've done some basic incident management. We're getting signal in to the ecosystem through EDR and through all of the other controls that are improving that signal. How do I go about becoming a better investigator or hunter? And so I know we've got a bunch of sessions, coming up on this to go really, really deep on this. But Dominique, can you kind of give us a quick overview of some of the key things that you're able to do with Defender ATP?
Of course. So that was our quick shout out to one of our colleagues who's going to do 4 sessions on advanced hunting. And it just stopped sharing on me again. So You saw a little bit of it before. It's going to share when we did the Go Hunt feature. So advanced hunting is a very, very fast hunting capability. We published the schema over on the side of our advanced hunting page. The database with the magnifying glass is the icon for this. So there's a lot of information that you can start pulling in. We've got a whole section on threat and vulnerability management, obviously all kinds of things that are operating on devices. The other key thing we have is shared queries. So the community queries are part of our GitHub repository. So people create queries to find different types of things. I don't actually have any of these in my environment that I am aware of, but I could try and run the query and it's going to come back and say, no, you don't have anything. If I wanted to see a query that did have, I think I want my, nope, URL detection. So I know I actually surf the web in my environment. So I can go ahead and say, for example, somebody has had to have gone to Google in my environment. I do it all the time. So I can see, yes, my Flutter puppy, he goes to Google. So Google is not going to be the thing that I'm going to create an alert on generally. So usually it's going to be something that's quite a bit more creative, but I can create a custom detection rule on here where detection name, I can decide how often it's going to run. I should provide actual useful descriptions when I do things like this.
That feature costs extra though.
That feature costs extra for me to actually type well. It's not one of my skills today. So I'm typing one-handed, which is why it's all numbers. So I can fill in all of this, give the information to my analysts to let them know what they should do. One of the really powerful features of this is I can make automated actions. In this case, I wasn't actually looking at a file, I was looking at URLs, but I could automatically say I'm going to isolate the device if I see a certain type of behavior going on. Initiate an investigation, collect packages. If it's a file, I can go ahead and allow and block the files. So it gives me a lot of power to do even more automated response within this environment. And like most of our options within MDATP, you can decide which particular set of devices you want this to go down on. So a lot of information, a lot of capabilities. Yeah, I think I'm going to let Michael go on the rest of how do you create really good queries. So Michael's one of our really good advanced hunters. And like I said, he's got 4 sessions. So we'll give you a lot more information on hunting, but it is very powerful and it also is very quick. So when you're trying to hunt, you're really wanting your data to come back quickly. You don't want to wait for 20 minutes. Advanced hunting is the key to finding a lot of really good information and searching through your data for things that you find sketchy that maybe isn't tied to an alert that Microsoft knows about.
Perfect. Yeah. So more to come. And, certainly that's an area that we have a lot of people who are super interested in, but wanted to give a little bit of taste of that. And we take a look at that. What people are typically also doing is making sure that they have a really good connection into the SIEM. And honestly, I see a lot of people, and there's been a few questions like, hey, how does this connect to Sentinel? What's the relationship between them? And most people are doing sort of the receiving connection fairly early on. But the important thing that really completes a lot of key scenarios is how do I close alerts? So if I am monitoring my alerts in my SIEM, and we talk to a lot of SOCs, which will actually have the first tier analysts just working basically out of the SIEM instead of directly through the console. We also see a lot of organizations that get them in the console. It kind of depends on how you operate. But if you manage an alert closed through the SIEM, you don't go back and close it. And as we'll get into later when we talk about some of the hardening things, not having it closed means it's going to sit open inside of the ATP environment, which is going to potentially impact some conditional access rules that allow me to measure the threat on the endpoint itself to determine whether I'm going to allow it to have access to something. So getting that bidirectional connection, super, super important. And then one of the things that we've seen emerging, probably not surprisingly since March of this year, is how can we use Defender ATP to help me better enable remote work. And the biggest thing is, hey, my VPN appliance is literally on fire if I'm pushing everything through it. Can I start to substitute some of those controls through Defender ATP and leverage the environment there? So I'll kind of kick it back to Dominique to kind of look at how do we do some of the web content inspection and filtering, and then we'll come back and take a look at some of the controls. Dominique.
Exactly. So we're going to actually start over in one of our reports that we have built in. This is our web protection report, and starts telling us I don't actually have any web detections, and that's fine. I don't have traffic spikes, which is also fine. But what's really interesting is this web threat summary. So I can see that I've gone to at least one malicious URL in the last 30 days. I have some custom indicators. Those were, I talked about unsanctioning Facebook. That's what these are. But then web activity. So web content filtering, this is your web proxy concept. So I can look and see what people are actually doing on their devices in the past 30 days. So obviously my environment doesn't have a whole lot going on. Yours would be much more chatty, but I can say, well, wait a minute, legal liability, maybe this is something that I need to be a little bit worried about. Adult content, similar concept, where I can go through and start looking at this. And then web content filtering blocks. I've actually got some rules set up in my environment to where I am blocking adult content, and I'm also blocking leisure. In this case, I know I'm blocking web-based email is what I'm blocking at this point. For any of these pieces in here, so I want to go check what was going on in legal liability. I had 5 requests, only 1 device. That's okay. Let me see what they're doing. So oldapps.com, which, yes, that is exactly what I was doing because I wanted an old vulnerable version of Notepad++. But there are some legal liabilities associated with it because you can get hacked versions of many different things. So these web protection reports are very handy for you to start seeing what's going on. And then if you see things that you're concerned about. So in my case, it was, I went to gambling websites. It's just what it is. Unfortunately, it wouldn't let me go to gambling websites because it kept being blocked. Because back into my settings, we have this set up for web content filtering. You can see why I don't type online because I can't spell. But I have a lot of configuration options to where I can decide what needs to be blocked within my organization. And this is being blocked directly from the device. So I don't have to be going through my VPN to make sure someone's going through, say, a squid proxy. I'm blocking it directly on my device. Lots of information about what users are doing, even if they're not sitting on your domain and your premise.
Yeah, and really just valuable because now I get some inspection points, beyond just what I have at a proxy server. The other capability I wanted to quickly show is if I go into, our devices node of Endpoint Manager and go into compliance policies, I'm going to go ahead and make a new policy, and I'm going to make it for Windows 10. And in this policy, I'm going to just device compliance. And when we get in here, we'll notice that there is a node for Defender ATP that allows me to choose, right? In order to be compliant, do I need to be completely clear of any risk? Do I need to have everything mitigated? Can I be at low? Do I have a potentially low risk threat for gaining access as I start to build out conditional access policies? So I can build out that compliance policy, which then allows me, if I go back into the endpoint security node and go back into conditional access, I can make a conditional access policy, and let's say I want to do it for all users. You notice it gives me a warning, don't lock yourself out. It's going to hit you too. And, make it for a specific cloud app. And let's say, for example, I want to protect access to Defender ATP, which seems like a sensible idea since it's my security infrastructure. And I can grant access specifically where the device is marked as compliant. And that compliance policy, as we just defined, is going to say, hey, you're going to have low device risk. You're not going to have unmanaged alerts, which is why managing those alerts closed from the seam ends up being really important as we transition to more of a zero trust perspective. And then finally, as most people kind of complete their journey in the first 90, start to enlist the assistance of human experts, whether that be showing up through the threat analytics portal or through Microsoft Threat Experts. Dominic, you want to kind of quickly show us what we have in threat analytics?
Will do. So threat analytics is our groups of researchers, and they are monitoring the world, seeing what's going on, and identifying new bad things that are happening. So this is what our threat analytics dashboard looks like. I'm still in a pretty good state. I'm happy about that. But I can see that there are a couple cases where these high impact threats are actually hitting on my devices. So on Cobalt Strike hiding in the red, I can go ahead and click on this and start looking at the report and seeing what exactly was going on. So our researchers write some very detailed, very comprehensive reports to explain what's going on, what the behavior looks like, what they're doing, why they're doing it as far as we can tell. The techniques observed, so we'll go down the MITRE path and say what the techniques are. We're going to tell you what you can do about it. So yes, you may be vulnerable to it, but here's different mitigation strategies you can put in place. Here's how Microsoft is going to detect these types of situations if they see them. And also we're going to give you advanced hunting queries so you can go look in your environment yourself if you choose and see what's going on. In this case, I actually had one device that had an alert, but it was a resolved alert. My configuration is good, so I'm pretty secure in this case. And then the mitigation, if I needed to do it, would be to update my Defender definitions. So I'm doing pretty good on this one, even though I did actually have an alert. I can click on any of these and they will take me into those alert details. Another version of this would be living off the land binaries. This is never going to go away because people are always going to use what's in place to do things and to do bad things. So again, it's a pretty detailed report on what's going on. And I can see in my case, I actually still have an active alert associated with this particular type of a threat. So I can go check that alert directly from here, see what's going on, see why I didn't do anything about it. Yes, I did try to do bad things yesterday. The other piece that we have in play is the Microsoft Threat Experts. Yet another group of very smart security researchers, and when you sign up for Microsoft Threat Experts, they search through anonymized data across a very wide range of our customers and use that to develop behavior profiles and identify new and unique types of situations that look suspicious. If that happened and you were signed up for Microsoft Threat Experts, you would actually get an alert in your environment that is tagged with Microsoft Threat Experts, and they will give you a very detailed report in this situation. See if I have one of mine up. I actually don't have any of my threat expert reports up, but they will give you an actual, here's the story, here's what we looked at, here's what we thought happened, and here's why we either think you need to do something or we think that you are okay. So I'm going to actually pull up from a different environment one of our situations that has a Microsoft Threat Expert alert within it. So you can see right here, this was probably me because I do things like this, but this is what a Threat Expert alert will look like. And you can see they give you this nice summary of what happened, a full timeline, what we recommend that you do in this case. This particular one was a ransomware simulator, so it wasn't actual ransomware. But they do give you a lot of detail, so you could address the situation if it turned out to be something truly malicious.
Yep, and that really is something that we continue to strive for, is how do we take the best of human intelligence and combine that with the best of what machines do the best, because one or the other.
So I lost Chris. Is that just me?
Yeah, I think we lost Chris's audio at least.
Oh, am I?
Oh, he's back.
There you go.
Is it back? All right. Okay, so I have no idea where I got lost, but yeah, best of what machines do best and what people do best. We try to bring that together. So we've just got a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to just suggest some things for as we move beyond, that first 30, first 90. Some of the things that people look at. We see a lot of customers looking at app control, and the app control, application allow listing, block listing. Really through multiple different models. And the three models I like to think of are reputation control, which is, hey, as it earns trust, you allow it to do it. Prevalence becomes a big indicator there. Admin control, which is to start to merge, the act of installing with the act of approving, if that's coming from a centralized authority, or explicit control, where I'm actually going to enumerate the things. So looking at app control, looking at leveraging more APIs. So I can connect the various systems, whether, obviously the SIEM is one, Power BI is another. But as I start to build those systems and interconnect them, a lot of this important functionality is exposed through APIs, and you can start to connect that in the environment. Similarly on the unification theme is, as I'm going down MDATP, am I looking at MTP and getting the full experience across all of the ATPs, as I will say, so to really get the best of all things and enhance that signal. And then finally, to continue to look at how do I harden through things like baselines, and do I want to secure my privileged access using a PAW? How do I use Secure Score? I'll kind of quickly bring up the baselines experience, which is, we do try to make it as simple as possible to apply the security baseline. So today we offer baselines for Windows 10, for Defender ATP, as well as for Microsoft Edge. We are currently iterating on all three of them. So we're working on the Edge 84 baseline, the Windows 10 2004, as well as an update to the Defender ATP baselines around a single, unified way of thinking about, how to provide the best security. The other resource I wanted to point out is, hey, if I'm coming from a pretty loose environment, we also have some guidance. It's at aka.ms/seccon framework, which references this GitHub repository, where we give some guidance about, hey, if I'm kind of going towards here, the security baselines are really designed for customers who are highly security conscious, not running as local admin, kind of right in the middle, already in a pretty good, pretty secure spot. What are the recommended steps we'd have to get there? So we've got this journey that goes all the way from, hey, what's the lowest impact, all the way through to the point where I have things really hardened. And maybe for some devices, just getting to here is going to be enough, because there's very little risk there to compensate for the over.
All right, sounds like we lost Chris again on this one. So going through the baselines, another thing that Microsoft provides is Microsoft Secure Score. So using the telemetry data that we're collecting, we give you recommendations of what you should update and the things that are going to have the most bang for your buck. Sorry, Chris, I started talking about Secure Score. Well, I lost you. So Secure Score, we also give you the capability to say what you look like in comparison to other people. So when I was doing assessments, the question was always, well, how do we look compared to the rest of the industry? It's a really hard question to answer, and Microsoft has a lot of data. So they have the capability to start answering those questions about Secure Score. So I'll share my screen real quick on this one, Chris, because I've got a different screen on this. But yes, yeah, so I can start. My score is not too bad. I'm doing a 56, so I'm okay with this one. And then I can see that require MFA, I could do that. I could decide, nah, I'm okay. I'm okay here. I don't want to actually do anything here. Or if you're doing things through other tools that are not Microsoft tools, we're not going to penalize you for using other tools, even though, of course, we want you to be all in on Microsoft. But you still get credit for the things that you're doing in multi-factor authentication and all of these other pieces that we're asking you to do. But then I've got my comparison here. So I can create a custom comparison that I want to look like the jewelry industry, or I can use Microsoft's comparisons that are based on organization size, location, a few other down in the weeds types of things. But it lets me see how I'm doing, because, how fast do you need to run to escape the bear? Faster than the other guy. So you want to be doing better, and we give you the actions that are going to help you be better. So that's part of Microsoft's philosophy of, we want to help you secure your devices. We're going to give you as much information as we have available on how to do those things.
All right, and we've gone past our time a little bit, but with that, we'd like to say to everyone, thank you so much for coming to join us. Hopefully, I know it was kind of a whirlwind journey, but hopefully we gave you some tips or tricks, and please let us know where you'd like for us to dive deeper on any of these topics.
Great. Some reminders, as Dominique and Chris had mentioned earlier, we have starting next week, that is July 15 all the way through August 5th, we have a series of 4 episodes on advanced hunting using Microsoft Threat Protection. So please join us. And in addition to that, we also have July 9 Azure Sentinel Workbooks Deep Dive. And then 2 more Azure Sentinel webinars, August 12, Threat Hunting and Dwell Time Reduction, as well as the Threat Intelligence Automation with the Risk IQ. For details on all these webinars that I just mentioned, please go to aka.ms/security webinars. And in case we missed to answer your questions, or if you have additional questions, you can visit us on the Microsoft Defender ATP forum at aka.ms/MDATP/TC. I would like to close this webinar by thanking Dominique and Chris for an awesome presentation. Thank you to the rest of the team who helped answering the questions. And most of all, I want to thank all of you for being part of our community and for joining us on these webinars. And we hope to see you next time. Goodbye.
Thanks, everybody.